to the team over at Cass and Konrad, the organizers of this engagement, everyone on this call, both alumni and members of the general public, to our panel of speakers, and to the youth from the Love Life Center in Kariga. And we will walk together. And I think I would just like to take this opportunity to address a few housekeeping rules. For the purpose of our engagement, I'd just like everyone on the call to please stay muted, especially when the speakers are on the call. We are monitoring the chat box, and I did see a few messages there coming through, the likes of Ozianda saying they can't hear anything. So I'm sure there will be a technical team that will perhaps monitor that. And if there is anything that you're hearing or uneasy about, please just drop us a message and we'll be able to steer responses from there. But with that, allow me to just welcome all of you to this particular engagement with Konrad and the Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung have created in their democracy series under the theme, Creating Spaces and Opportunities for Rural Youth. Now, what has seemed, or rather become apparent, is that this particular theme is trying to identify what has been seen as the forgotten community. With urbanization and mass migration from rural areas to urban areas, we've really seen probably the wider community turn their backs towards rural areas. And obviously with a lack of educational opportunities and certain work opportunities, a lot of people have really not come back and plowed into our rural areas. But that presents us with an opportunity that is ripe for the taking. And I do believe that there are natural and organic opportunities in rural areas that people can take stock of, even in terms of employment opportunities, because in South Africa, the paradox that we live under is that imisebenzi ikhona. Our panel of experts will just be going through discussions, engaging with us, helping us address the major challenges caused by rural youth unemployment and its direct effects, as well as providing practical solutions to how we can create spaces and opportunities for this rural youth. Now, for the purpose of the audience, I will be introducing these speakers in their order in which they will speak. The first speaker will be Mr. Siyabulela Zondani. Our second speaker will be Ukwezi Ntobe, third speaker Ulwanda Maqwelane, and our final speaker Masikole Boy. Now, allow me to introduce our first speaker for this evening, and I'll introduce the speakers as they finish off in terms of their bios. Our first speaker for this evening is an alumni to this very university by the name of Siyabulela Zondani. He holds a BA degree in psychology and honors degree in labor relations and human resources. He has experience in the NPO sector, having worked with a focus on youth development and facilitating socioeconomic opportunities for emerging farmers operating in the rural areas of the Eastern Cape. Most recently, he has held the positions of branch manager at the pre-branch and regional manager, which expanded across the Eastern Cape for the National Youth Agency, or rather the NYDA, the National Youth Development Agency, that extends non-financial and financial support to youth-owned businesses in the Eastern Cape. I'd now like to hand over to Siyabulela Zondani to just address us with his opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Belle, and greetings to everybody you call, my associates, former and present. My name is Siyabulela Zondani. I'm currently within my day within the Beaufort West region, responsible for the operation of this university. The topic as it relates to young people, opportunities for young people in the rural setting and rural areas, is one that, in my view, needs a particular approach as it relates to the type of work that anybody can really do in that space. I remember attending a book launch by the Songezo Zibi recently, and one of the the important piece there was to really instruct us all as young professionals and young people as an active in our particular spaces, is to give us all an instruction not to be helpful but to be useful in those spaces, because quite a number of us want to basically leave mark, want to assist, want to lend support to the areas and sometimes communities that we come from, but we no longer live and work there. But the question is, how do we do that? And so some of my contributions this afternoon will be along those lines, to really be useful, then seeing ourselves as helpful people, because the question becomes, or at least what's important is making the decision right instead of making the right decision. And I'll get to what I mean by that later on. Some of my interactions with communities on the outskirts of the Eastern Cape, fortunately, my most recent role was that of a regional manager within the province of the Eastern Cape, understanding that we had 8 district municipalities. And if one to look at the records, you understand that all municipalities that are basically defunct and are not in good shape as it relates to, or in accordance to the Auditor General, are those coming from predominantly rural areas. And there's a reason for this. Again, Mr. Dibiza mentioned that we've got, my apologies, forgotten communities, forgotten young people that have been left behind by the mass representation and technological advances that we've experienced in the recent years have left an even bigger chasm that we need to really address and look into as practitioners in the space. So I kick off with a disclaimer that I have fortunately worked with the Karika Love Life Center in my dealings with them as a branch manager in Port Elizabeth. I understood how they work. We had a few sessions there, and you find that some of the outcries from the youth in that particular area is that Itinaha is not recognized as part of the broader Nelson Mandela Metro, and that was a cry and a problem for quite some time. That it would be regarded as a backward of the metro, and no one really would pay enough attention to it. So I'm alive to those dynamics. I understand them very well, and I think we're a long way in working with Mr. Stella Boyce in there and many of his colleagues to change that narrative. And I think, again, treading carefully, understanding that you need to make the decision right and not simply make the right decision, thinking that we can bring the product services into those particular communities from our own wisdom. It's not work like that, at least not in my experience. We need comprehensive consultation, and we need deep consultation as it relates to the delivery of products and services, or any sort of useful interventions into communities such as those. Remember, we deal with communities, and they differ. They vary in how critical situations are as it relates to unemployment, underemployment, joblessness in general, and young people who are sort of discouraged as it relates to being economically involved or participating in the affairs of their own communities. So it's us there. What are those affairs? And so we've got quite a number of frameworks that assist us as it relates to that. We've got the district development model, which has been promulgated recently by government. It's something that we all should learn to get a good grasp and understanding for. We have conversations around that I actually enjoyed leading. One where we dealt with working yet poor, a discussion document coming out of ECSEC, the Eastern Cape Socio-Economic Council. They dealt with this as it relates to young people who are in employment opportunities but are underemployed and are underpaid, and are working at the threshold of about 3,500 rand, which is the basic income threshold, right? It's the floor of our basic income wage. We need to also deal and discuss issues such as the basic universal income grant, and whether this should really be something that we look into as we tread forward as only one of many instruments that we can put into practice as we try to assist young people to move from a place of deprivation and helplessness at times to a place where basic minimum requirements and basic needs are met. So the unfortunate, as it relates to some of the work that I've done, is realizing that you step into communities at times that don't have basic services in place. I make an example of Krisani. They've got potholes, size of small animals at times, and you think to yourself, how do you navigate something like that? Water outages, power outages, almost 3 to 4 times a day. That type of environment can be very discouraging for young people. And so when walking into those type of environments, one needs to really get carefully and ask themselves, number one, who are the key stakeholders within these communities? That for me becomes a very important step to take and invite them into a discussion to lay out what the current conditions and challenges are as we speak. Not speak too much about what has been done necessarily and other interventions that may have come in past, sense of how they can get involved in some of the tools and instruments that you may bring as an activist, as a practitioner, and walk along with them on that journey. That becomes critical. I remember, and I'm making an example of some of the interventions made there. Some communities you walk in and you become part of, you find that you don't have perhaps business forums for young people where they engage and they speak about the current conditions that prevail in their communities, the opportunities that prevail, the shortcomings in their own business lives, whether or not they're compliant. Whenever a big organization comes by and offers to assist them, are they ready for that? Just the other day in Beaufort West here, we had Central come by. They basically were asking even us as the NYDA whether or not we've got young people who are compliant and can actually become subcontractors in one of their big projects that they have that's happening on the big on some of these big my projects. Let me just attend to this.
Just unmute, Sia, sorry.
My apologies. I'm expecting load shedding in the next few minutes, so I left my phone quite far away from me to charge. So that becomes one of the important elements for me as it relates to interventions and opportunities, and that explains for young people to become a key and thorny issue for me in some of the rural areas that we have has been access to internet broadband. To such that I've actually even engaged with some IT forums, such as the one led by Mr. Luyogu, and I was interested to find that, in fact, the access to internet as it relates to some of their studies is not something that they need all the time. They may need it between 8 and 12, 2 and 3, but perhaps some communities is not needed all the time or right through the evening, etc. And so I was quite interested in some of the contributions made there and suggestions that we can cut those costs and that these type of interventions can actually be delivered without being afraid to actually bring them forth and the cost as a stumbling block. My basic message, I think, would be the basic access to relevant and reliable information. I found that within those communities, you'd get a very good sense that reliable information is hard to find. Access to that information that is accurate is difficult to find. Those frustrations sort of snowball into social unrest because you get quite a number of people gathering in spaces and finding that there are no interventions that can meet their needs. So this is where it becomes important again facilitator, chair of the session, to make the decision right and not necessarily make the right decision. And I think sometimes we become so eager to actually make interventions. We need to actually understand that it will take time, first of all. And we ought to take that into account, that it will not be an overnight exercise. And until you've got right people in the room from that community, we have not started to do our work. It's not about us as practitioners, as activists. It's about communities that are in the communities that we want to deliver these services to. So that's where I think I take the caption from Songe's rather be useful than be helpful. Our communities don't need us to have an ivory tower type of an approach. It's just a matter of how can we assist to the challenges you see within your communities and the resources that you can mobilize. Then we can bring our expertise, our tools of trade, and try and meet those challenges. I've had quite a number of successes when I've partnered with local authorities, councillors, or whatever. Becomes very critical to explore these pathways of opportunity. So you know that we had your SA Youth Mobi, we've had your Harambes coming on board. Private NGOs are really keen to get involved and assist young people. At times they come with a number of issues as well as challenges, such as the connection to data, etc., for one to actually go on and apply to these particular opportunities. That's where we need to then have that conversation with private sector, with NGOs, and really give a true reflection of the conditions on the ground before any type of a program can be rolled out. I want to basically go to the opportunities that we need to really look into. The communities and municipalities that are in distress require a different type of practitioner, at least in this day and age. They require a practitioner that, number one, comes from the community, and I think this is enough. We require a sense of mentorship in these communities, a sense of coaching that we can bring on board, because you find a number of these people who are looking for opportunities, in fact, are leaders within their own right, are leaders of these structures. And so in our own way, we need to also provide that mentorship. We need to provide that coaching and handling exercise as we move them forward. Now, in my case, we deal a lot with youth-owned enterprises, and some of the challenges, I think I mentioned this in the beginning, would be your compliance issues. So what I would ordinarily do coming in or walking into a new community is get an understanding, because what you'd find is that every now and again you get in situations where we need to perhaps hold major events, hold developmental programs. We've got stakeholders who come on board, who want to partner with communities, but our local businesses, young people, our local enterprises are not compliant and cannot actually gain access into those opportunities. This can lead to direct unrest. And so some of the groundwork that then in this particular aspect of socioeconomic opportunities that we need to do as practitioners is to ensure compliance that relates to young people who are in business and who want to start their own businesses, either at a small or a medium scale. That becomes very important, because bringing in a new service provider into a community, whereas there perhaps is an event, a session, an office of the premier briefing session, can result in quite a number of negative outcomes from the day of that particular event or session going forward. And there are deficits that we also need to understand as practitioners and activists in our own spaces. So I think a humble approach, I think I even remember coming into Sunday's River Valley, going in there and listening to some of the issues that faced young people in that particular space. It can get volatile, and I think you need the right type of practitioner of that type of engagement. Again, in my view, consultation and comprehensive consultation, even if it's over consulting, becomes very important, because you want to make the decision right, have the right stakeholders around the table, and you'd be surprised at how much problem solving can be done. Now, there are low-hanging fruits that I can also mention as it relates to programs that can be delivered. We've got quite a number of departments that assist us, and at times we complain that there's no young people don't come to the fore, they don't apply for opportunities, etc., etc. This forms part of that discouragement that we're about. And so, if you don't have a direct link to communities, your programs are bound to fail. You don't need only buy-in, but you need ownership of these particular programs and interventions that you want to roll out. And that is where the hard work is. Implementation of the programs is not necessarily all that difficult to do, so long as you've got more than just buy-in, but ownership from the community members, especially the leaders of those youth-owned structures there. So I think from where I'm standing in my own experience, that has been a critical and very, very important starting point for any intervention that we may have to look into. And I think pathways and opportunities for young people, it's always good to see that they are coming along, but the question becomes, are we coordinating information correctly? And I don't think we are, as practitioners, as activists. And I think that's where the work needs to be. More often than not, you find community members not understanding the type of programs that are in their community, not being aware of them, not understanding the application process. I make a quick example of when there was an outreach program that was initiated by the office of the deputy mayor within the BCM. We went out to King Williamstown, Lovedale, TVET College, and this program was about getting young people to apply for NSFAS through the online platform, which is always difficult in those areas because of bandwidth and access to internet and high cost of data, right? So obviously we had to also lean towards the paper-based approach. And sitting on the other side of the table with a number of young people, because everybody had to have their hands on deck on that day, because there just weren't enough people to be standing around not doing anything. Everyone had to assist with the manual application process. Sitting opposite those young people, you get a sense that whatever intervention that we bring on board, at least as it relates to the paperwork, it needs to be user-friendly. It needs to be fit for purpose also. We have to take into cognizance that some of these young people are living with or staying with partially illiterate or maybe illiterate parents or grandparents, and they themselves are not coming from the best type of educational systems. And so ease of access and accessibility of the actual process, it needs to be fit for purpose, and it needs to be user-friendly, because Siyabulela Zondane is sitting on this end could understand the nitty-gritties as it relates to that particular application form. But there were complexities for the young person sitting on the other side of the table. And I asked myself, a young person receiving these type of application forms, either for jobs, for opportunities, through internships, or even to apply for NSFAS, they sit down and they look at them, and at times they are defeated by the jargon that is there. So there's quite a lot of work that is to be done, and even at conceptualization of programs. We ought not to really speak amongst ourselves when it comes to these. When we finalize our programs, they need to be fit for purpose, and they need to get input from the very people who are going to be beneficiaries of them. So that has been quite an interesting revelation for me. We sat there the whole day going through these applications, and I thought to myself, those who were not able to access this particular opportunity, what became of them? And you get a good sense that quite a number of young people fall by the wayside and through the cracks because of inaccessibility of programs, because of red tape, and how we as practitioners and officials who design and develop these programs, how we put them and package them. At times they look good to whoever the donor is, right? But they simply do not trickle down as it relates to understanding and being able to comprehend them for the young people who we are trying to assist. So that is something we need to look at, but I'm a big proponent of broadband in our areas. We need to attend to that. I also think a practitioner needs to get a good understanding and a good sense of the political leadership as well as political dynamics that exist within their own wards, their own districts, because service delivery protests really do not come out of a vacuum. They do not come out of nowhere. I mentioned some of the issues in just one municipality, now facing stage 6 load shedding as we sit here today. That is just a compound effect. There are so many other issues that affect the ordinary young person on a day-to-day basis, and so quite a number of stakeholders need to come together. I feel from Home Affairs, from Department of Labor, right through to the NYDA and many others. I know I worked very well with our local LEDs, local economic development officers. They become critical in these conversations. And so I think I'd pause there, Chair, to really just put forward or maybe just foreground some of the discussions we'll be having today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sian. I'd just like the host to maybe disable my video so I am able to show my face. Thank you. Thank you so much for your insightful knowledge there, Sia. Making the right, or rather making the decision right instead of making the right decision. Thank you for just trickling our thoughts as we navigate our way through the current conditions and finding the right tools to use to take stock of your own words as activists and practitioners, you know. And in this particular journey, thank you for helping us to just exploit these pathways of opportunities and create the right kind of linkages. I think for me, that's what I've taken home, is that if we're able to then kind of be able to exploit these pathways of opportunity, create the right kind of linkages and knowledge sharing with the particular stakeholders, then we should be well on our way for creating the right kind of opportunities and just being aware of the conditions that exist, because at the end of the day, these rural environments operate in a unique vein. Our second speaker will be Ukwezi Ndobe, and I'd just like to invite Ukwezi to maybe just unmute himself and show his face before I introduce him formally. We are noting some of the questions, comments that are coming through on the chat box, and perhaps at the end, we'll then be able to couple them together and draw into a Q&A session. So whoever has been posing a question, we've been seeing them. Don't think that I'm trying to sabotage you intentionally. We are monitoring the chat box. We do see your conversations. We are seeing your engagements, and we will get to it shortly. Now, just to introduce our second speaker, colleagues, Ukwezi Ndobe will try and map us out. Perhaps he'll provide some of the functionality of rural areas, because as Sia did say, these are unique environments. And as someone who comes from a rural area of Port St. John's on the wild coast of the Eastern Cape, Ukwezi Ndobe did his primary school in the N2 across Untitled, Port St. John's and Nvta. And in 2012, he started working in the corporate environment under skills development, working for a training and development company in Pretoria. He then relocated in 2015 to PE, where he worked for the wholesale and retail Nvta until 2017. And then he joined the LG Nvta, where he is currently employed. He holds an honors degree in social sciences, majoring in politics and international relations, and also has an advanced diploma in project management. Thank you so much, Kwezi, for joining us on the call. And as our second speaker, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Bele. Good afternoon, everyone. Taking from Usia, the first presenter, I think I might not necessarily focus on each slide of my presentation, but talk generally around the topic that is creating spaces and opportunities for rural youth. Now, my focus will be through skills development. Sorry. Now, we as LG Nvta, we are one of the 21 Nvtas within the sectors that we have across. Now we are solely focusing on the local government space, which is your municipalities and your COGTA, SALCA, IMATU, and SAMU. Those are our primary stakeholders, and we also sit on provincial meetings with your Office of the Premier, ICISEC, and other stakeholders. And I'm glad that Usia did mention some of the challenges that are being experienced in our space. And we now as LGCTA, what we are doing, our primary focus is to ensure that we reach out to all the communities across the country, not necessarily the Eastern Cape. We work with 257 municipalities, and we also have some active development agency or municipal development agencies that we work with. Now, what is our sole mandate? Our sole mandate is to give funding to these primary stakeholders and to ensure that these stakeholders reach out to the communities and provide skills development programs. So the overview of this presentation will be looking at the background of skills development, which I will not focus much on it, the new learning environment, which I will not focus on it as well. And then we'll look at the different learning interventions and how we fund them, which is what I will mostly look into, because I think that will be what most of the young people will be interested in on this presentation. So if you can move on to the next slide, Setu. Basically, what happens is that we, as the skills development entities, we were first operating under the Manpower Act, which was having quite a number of challenges, which one of those was the lack of coherent, systematic approach into skills development, no overall strategy for upgrading skills for people who are working. Now, this means that we previously, I think under the previous regime of government and the rule of the apartheid, skills development was not open to everyone. And that posed a huge challenge to both the employees and also the unemployed people, because the training and development was solely meant for certain people within the workspaces. Then we move to the new learning environment. Now, when we talk of the new learning environment, we're looking at the establishment of the SETAs. The SETAs were established in 2001, but their establishment was based on the Skills Development Act of 1998, which is also regulated by the Skills Development Levy Act of 1991. Now, the purpose of this act was to ensure that the knowledge and expertise are expanded for everyone to have access to better opportunities that are presented by different employers out there. Now, if we talk of different employers, as I indicated earlier, that we talk of your municipalities, your government department, your retail stores, whoever that has a running company, we refer to them as employers. So the new learning environment was solely looking at ensuring that if you are employed, let us develop your skill. If you are unemployed, then we engage with the employer to say, employer, we've got these unemployed people from the communities, whether rural or urban communities, but these people need to be exposed to the working environment. They need to gather experience. They need to be trained to become qualified so that they themselves can become employers. Now, if we can move on, say, to the slide that are talking to the learning interventions. We've got learnerships that we are funding, and those learnerships, they vary from different NQF levels. We start from NQF level 1 up to NQF level 8. I think we do have a learnership that is pitched at NQF level 8, that is equivalent to a master's degree. So what we do through this program, if you can move on, Setu, what we do is that for unemployed people, that is people from rural or urban areas, we have these kind of fundings. The learnership may range between 12 to 24 months, depending on the credits of that specific learnership. And we provide stipend as the SETA for those people. Now, we've had quite a number of incidents where people are saying this 1.8 means nothing. Now, the question that we normally ask is that if you are complaining that 1,800 is not enough as a stipend, who is given a pocket money that amounts to that 1,800 when they go to study at a university? For us who come from rural areas, we know that back then we used to be given 400 rands or 500 rands to sustain you for a month. So the SETAs were established, and we were given a mandate that for all unemployed learnerships, we need to provide a stipend that amounts to 1,800 every month for the duration of the learnership. And then we pay tuition that costs 20,000 per learner. So a learner only presents themselves. When I refer to a learner now, I'm referring to an unemployed person. Once they are enrolled on this learnership, we now refer to them as learners. And on the next slide, we have a project that has touched many of us in our organization in Xolobeni, Bizana. If people are aware of what is happening at Xolobeni, there's a fight between government, the Australians, and the people of that village. There's uranium that was discovered in that village, and people were sidelined, and they were not considered for any positions, or they were not consulted as well for the mining of that uranium in their village. So now, through our relations with the Alfrenzo Development Agency, we have a horticulture project there that is aiming at upskilling the unemployed people. Now, we as the SETA, we don't only focus on the youth alone. The reason why that we don't focus on the youth alone, if we are being realistic or we are being honest with ourselves, if we're talking about young people, we are not consistent on what we want, and we are also are not committed on what on what we are doing. So skills development is actually a concept that is open for both young people and elderly people. So the pictures that you are seeing here, these are people who are being trained on a learnership. It's an NQF level 3 horticulture. It's a national certificate. And part of this learnership, they have a practical and a theoretical component, because once this learnership is finished, we want to say to these people, now you can open up your own small businesses, become employers, do farming, sell whatever that you have planted, or if you do whatever small business that you can, then we will provide skills for you. Then we've got apprenticeships that we are also funding. Apprenticeships are 3-year programs that come with the what do you call this, the trade testing on the 4th year. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning these two learning intervention is because there's a mismatch between the supply and demand of qualifications. One, people are still stuck on the traditional qualifications. I will not mention them because I don't want to discourage anyone, but there's qualifications that we are seeing young people still doing, and we know that those qualifications, everyone has them, and people are sitting at home, or most people have them, but they cannot be employed. But now we as the SETAs, we are mandated to say, you must go out there, preach to the young people that they must look for qualifications that are, one, regarded as scarce and critical. They must look for qualifications that are not only going to make them employable, but they must apply for qualifications that will make them employers. Now, one of those, if I were to make one of the examples that we have currently, we've got a group of, I think about 40 unemployed people that will be taken by Buffalo City Development Agency. They'll be doing a plumbing and a bricklaying learnership. Now, those two qualifications, or those two trades, because they are not regarded as qualifications, they are regarded as trades. Those two trades, after those young people have completed them, they can easily become employers themselves. They can open their own plumbing companies, start tendering, or start doing house plumbing, or tender to the municipality. Also with the bricklayers, we are looking at people who will not only look for jobs, but we know everyone these days, they don't want to buy stands that have already been built, but people want to build their houses from scratch, and people are now moving to rural areas to build where they will avoid paying rates and whatever that is being paid when you live in an urban area. So our focus as LGCTA has now changed to say, let us look into ways of trying to make these qualifications or these trades fashionable to young people. We know everyone wants to sit in the office, but we are well aware that for us who are wearing suits and ties, we are getting paid way less. But people who wear overalls and jeans are the ones who are being paid more because they are doing the actual work. They've got expertise that we people who sit in the office don't have. And they also have what we now refer to as side hustles. And these days, looking at the economy and everything, if you are only focusing or if you are solely dependent on your job, it means you will be living from hand to mouth. Your salary comes in, you spend it on groceries, school fees, and everything else, and then it's gone. So we have now changed the dimension of skills development. Also, we're not leaving out the opportunities that are out there for bursary applicants. We have bursaries that we issue. We've got learners that are at Nelson Mandela Bay, at Nelson Mandela University. Some of these bursaries are applied for by the municipality as our stakeholders. Now, what we are having as a challenge is that young people are not ready to get their hands dirty. The young people, whether rural, coming from rural areas or urban areas, no one wants to get their hands dirty. Everyone wants to sit in the office. Everyone wants a quick fix kind of a solution. But with the current situation that we are going through, actually globally, not only South Africa, we as the CETA are saying young people need to open up their minds. They need to look at other avenues. You need to realign your goals. If needs be, you are still having an opportunity because there are quite a number of funders out there that are willing to fund people who will be providing skills that are classified as scarce and critical within different sectors. I think one thing that the first presenter touched on was the issue of lack of access to resources. This is a huge challenge across all sectors. Even when the employers want to bring in unemployed people, the first thing that comes in is, do you have enough resources to accommodate these people? And if these people are brought in, do they have will you have capacity, to house these young people or these people that you'll be bringing on board? So the issue of the resources is not only is not only subjected to one sector, but it's cutting across all sectors, and all employers are struggling with the same issue, including the general public. We still having people who don't have smartphones. They cannot submit their applications. There's villages like Ekolobeni. If you go to that village, you'll be told that young kids do not go to town until a certain age when they are going to look for work, because from that village to Ebizana, I think it cost about 40 to 45 rands. So if you can't go with your child to town because it will cost double, if it's 2 people on the bus. So we are still not there yet as a country. And I think we still need to ensure that young people, especially young people, are given this information about the opportunities that lie out there. And we, as the seaters, there's 21 of us. Like I indicated earlier, that we've got, for each sector, there's a seater. We are local government, and we are catering for the municipalities. There's MICT seater that caters for communication and IT. There's MERSETA that caters for mechanical and engineering sectors. There's HW seater that caters for health and welfare. And there's quite a number of us as seaters. But now the problem is people do not understand the role of the seaters, and people don't know about the seaters. You can even ask our bursary holders as to what do we do as the seaters. They will say, no, we only fund bursaries, of which our scope is not only limited to funding bursaries. We fund quite a number of learning interventions, your bursaries, candidacy programs, your apprenticeship, your learnerships, short courses, everything that has to do with developing a skill of a person, because what we want is to ensure that people do not become employed, but people become employers. Then if you are trained and you become qualified, then you stand a better chance of being employable, and or you become an employer yourself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kwezi. And I guess you really spoke at large about spaces of opportunity within skills development through seaters in rural areas. And of course, I think just collecting your thoughts with a focus and the shift in the landscape, particularly for the LG seater and other seaters that are responsible. And without further ado, I am wary of time. Thank you so much to everyone who is still on this call, who is contributing to the conversations in the chat box. I'm seeing the emojis also go up, and I don't want to take stock of a lot of time. I'm merely the facilitator. Allow me to then channel us through to the woman in the house, Ulwanda Makwelane. Ulwanda now serves on the Fort Cox Agriculture and Training Institute as the Curriculum Advisory Committee. She is also a researcher on the Amanzi for Food program funded by the WRC, and she's for the former communications personnel for a non-profit Each One, Teach One in the Eastern Cape Awareness Campaign. Currently, Ulwanda serves as the research assistant to the Murray and Roberts Chair for the Environmental Education and Sustainability. She is also a research associate for the policy space and is also an MEd Environmental Education candidate at Rhodes University. I'd just like to invite you, Ulwanda, to just unmute yourself and show your mic, and then be able to dive into your engagements while still keeping to the theme, creating spaces and opportunities for rural youth. Over to you, Ulwanda.
Thank you, Amandla, and thank you to our previous speakers as well. Igama lam Ulwanda Makwelane, commonly referred to as Ulu. I think, colleagues, I'll just go into it and speak to the topic at hand. I think as the province and as the state as a whole, we are facing a particular crisis that we have seen in recent reports that have outlined the high levels of employment among youth. And there have been various calls among various sectors that has called for us to actually engage our understanding of the current political economy, how it is structured. And there's also been a need and an imperative call for us to really engage it, for it to be reformed and structurally addressed. And this is imperative for two reasons. It is imperative because we need to respond to the systematic and structural inequalities that are still prevalent within our communities. And in changing those and attempting to restructure those structural and systemic inequality, we then attempt to redress sustainable livelihoods within our communities and affect the everyday layman person, which is you, myself, and our family members. And I want to start this conversation in understanding the political economy, because in understanding the need to restructure the political economy, we will understand why it is important for us to really engage the agrarian political economy question in South Africa and its need to reform within and of itself, particularly for the context of the Eastern Cape. If we look at the Eastern Cape, one of our gold mines, different to other provinces such as other metro provinces such as Johannesburg and Cape Town, is that the Eastern Cape has got a vast land proportion of agriculture. And it has got mass potential of employment, particularly for the youth. Unfortunately, over the past years in our democracy, it has been unable to translate in the job creation and the transition of Black farmers into the commercial sector. And I think we need to sit with that problem and really look at it from a question of policy, look at it from a question of the economy, and look at it from a point of view of transformation, equity, and inclusion. If you look at the current programs that we have in terms of state intervention, they very much focus on a cash transferal model, and a cash transferal model or a grant system that is not sustainable in and of itself. Because these programs have a start and a finish, but they are unable to absorb these trainees or intern learners. What does that mean? And what is the impact of that? And are we seeing value for money? And another question we need to ask ourselves, are our economies actually seeing real tangible change in terms of equity and transformation? So those are the questions that we need to engage. Other elements of the question that we need to engage is, how are we ensuring that the state is not operating in a silo effect when it comes to programs that are meant to catalyze change within our communities? For example, if we look at the agricultural sector, from 94 up until to date, there has been a concerted effort to ensure that we have a vibrant emerging sector of Black farmers, but that has not been able to translate. And the premise of that is that our policy structure is not a one that is strong enough to ensure that we facilitate change within our respective communities. What do I mean about that? How are we ensuring that we are incubating Black farmers from external market threats? Is that a sustainable model? How are we ensuring that the silo effect, if we look at literacies, when we speak of literacies, both in state and sometimes in the private sector as well, we look at literacies very much at an entry-level understanding to say, no, the farmers are illiterate, therefore cannot engage. That is not true. It's not a factually true statement. If you look at the literacy component, you have to look at it as a value chain in and of itself, both from the state, both from the private sector, and both from the actual stakeholder, which is the farmer. Because if you look at the LED officers that are meant to provide assistance to the farmers in terms of business plan, in terms of market engagement, in terms of the engagement of them with the state and other external stakeholders, you find that there is a gap there. Sometimes you find in some instances that the LED officer in and of themselves are also not aware of the policies that need to assist that need to assist Black farmers. You also find that there are patronage networks that exist within local government systems as well, within offices of state that are meant to assist Black farmers, that then create buffer zones of market entry and that of market engagement. And I think those are the issues that we need to engage in terms of ethical leadership, in terms of the state, the silo approach that we have, and in terms of us understanding the role of the state, understanding the role of the farmer, and having that in conversation with the need for us to transform and or restructure the agrarian political economy. And all of that, I say, is located within the state in and of itself, and our ability to use our critical mass to force the state to come to the conversation. If you look at what is happening in the Eastern Cape currently, especially with the emerging industry of cannabis in the province, there's a lot of potential investors that are coming into the province wishing to invest and seeing this as a national economic and development mechanism, both for national and provincial, for the provincial economy. But I ask the question, how are we planning to engage Black farmers in particular? Do we understand the transformation agenda? Do we understand the equity question that needs to be the foundation of our transformation talks? Do we actually have a plan for economic development and transformation that will ensure that from the point of inception, right up until we have a farmer that is seen and recognized as a commercial farmer, there is a clear developmental pathway that these farmers are in, and they are protected from external market threats. And I think that's very imperative if we are to engage the issue of sustainable economic development and livelihoods. And if we also need to question the role of women, particularly women in this discussion, how are we structuring that conversation? And I don't think we are actually ready, as much as we are inviting investors into the sector to say, come, we are ready, we want to talk, we want to have these development plans with you. I do not think that we have a clear enough plan to ensure that we address the issue, the questions of equity, we address the issue of sustainable development, we address the issue of transformation, because what we need is true and genuine change that we actually see within our rural economies and the transformation of that. So when we speak about the transformation or the restructuring of the agrarian political economy, we also need to think about it in conversation with the just skills transition and how that will look like. If we are saying that we want to compete within the international market, that means we need to have production. That means we need to have commercial value chains. That means we need to have real developmental plans for the Eastern Cape. And how does that look like? Do we have production companies? Do we have partnerships that ensure that we are able to diversify within the market of the cannabis industry, and not that we become producers that export to other provinces for them to have a value added, that all of these productions from the point of planting to the point of going to the market shelf are actually done in the Eastern Cape. And this will create a trickle economy where we are not only looking at agriculture as a primary production, but we are looking at agriculture as an entire value chain that is able to create jobs. So I think we need to be very, I think we need to open our collective thinking when we address these issues and look at it from a broad spectrum. And I think from our previous speaker, although I think the presentation was well intended, I really got the understanding or the idea that here we are looking at the Dead Poet Society. I remember it used to have this saying that says "Carpe diem," and it was really about seize the day. And unfortunately, our structural and systemic inequalities in South Africa, particularly that of the Eastern Cape, do not allow for us to really invest in that carpe diem rugged individualism that is premised on a liberal market thinking. I think we need to have a really almost socialist approach when we are talking to development, particularly for provinces such as the Eastern Cape, because of our historical history of also looking at it from a point of view of the local migration issue that we've had over the years. I think I wrote an article about it on Daily Maverick, and the impact that the skills migration has on our capacity to innovate. Because when we talk about development, we must be prepared and be bold enough to think outside of the box in terms of how we conceptualize development, in terms of how we understand the economy and how it ought to work. My recent article in Sunday Times really spoke about the concept that we actually use about Ubuntu, and not speaking about it in a very performative way that we dress and now it's Heritage Day, but speaking and rooting it within a political discourse. And that political discourse should inform how we then understand conceptually and how we then implement our developmental frameworks, because it has to speak to our historical context. It has to speak to equity in terms of transforming the sector, equity in terms of job creation, equity in terms of gender equality, equity in terms of how we generate the economy, and how we are then looking at this at an entire value chain purpose. And I think one of the arguments I made is that we really need to start looking at forming, not us really, but Black farmers in particular, they really need to start looking at forming their own union to create a critical mass to actually force government to come to the party. Because for this type of development to actually come into its actualization, we need to reimagine and reposition the role of the Black farmer within the agrarian political economy. Because it is when we reimagine and reposition the role of the Black farmer within the agrarian political economy as a whole, that we will be able to start to agitate in terms of what is fair, what is just, and use our critical mass, in fact, to change the status quo. I believe that the Eastern Cape is rich in skills, it is rich in capacity, it has people who are willing to work, but the state must come to the party, the state must provide the resources in an equitable and distributive manner that will see the Eastern Cape and its youth prosper through sustainable development means. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lulu, for your contributions. And I can appreciate how you've kind of navigated us to the public, political, and all kinds of interests that lie within rural areas, and inspiring us, or rather imploring us, to open up our collective thinking. Our last speaker that I'd like to invite on the call, just before we go into a Q&A session, is Mascole Boy. And I'd like to invite Mascole to also do the same and follow the same fashion in unmuting his mic at his presentation. Mascole Boy is an activist, political analyst, and a lecturer at Rhodes University. He has largely worked with the rural and township communities in the NGO sector, and he is currently reading for his PhD. Masixole, Kaskutus.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much, colleagues. Firstly, to the organizers, but also to other speakers of this conversation. And I think for me, what is important is what this conversation. And I think for me, what is important about this conversation as an activist, as a scholar, is not only about the practical opportunities that one can talk about in relation to rural youth. But I think for me as an activist scholar, what is important about the conversation is this notion of forgotten communities. And for me, why we were referring to forgotten communities and how did we get to that? You know, and sometimes we say this without unpacking it, and why we in South Africa, in a democratic South Africa, under the Black leadership, political leadership, that mostly in our case in Eastern Cape come from rural areas. Why are we still insisting or speaking about the issue of rural communities as forgotten people? And I think for me to firstly start with that notion is to unpack the fact that how rural people in South Africa are still viewed is viewed through the colonial gaze, you know. And for me, that's where we need to start. And for me, this is about how our government view rural poor people. And this speaks to the ontological question of being poor and rural and Black in South Africa. And that's why today we speak about forgotten communities. Even what we watch on television, the documentaries and all of these things about the material condition of Black people in rural context is still shocking, because on the notion of how the ontological question of being and how we view Black people, particularly rural context. And this clearly relates to how the apartheid colonial system view Black people, and how the apartheid system view Black people translated also to the services, the healthcare, the education, and all other services that Black people had to receive because of the ontological question of being and how Black people were viewed. And one will ask, did this change, or how Black rural people are viewed post-1994, if there's such a thing? And it didn't change. And we as Black people, but also the Black political leadership has instilled and internalized on how we view ourselves, particularly rural poor people. And why is the case that the material condition of Black people in the rural context is still the same compared to any other Black people in South Africa? And it's this internalization of the inferiority complex on how we view people, Black rural people, and particularly Black rural youth. And that's where the question of service comes into play, because there's no other explanation on how rural Black people in the rural context are still backward in all the services we talk about, you know. And for me, that's what is important about this conversation. It brings about the question of but how we view Black rural poor people in a South African context. And I think that's where I wanted to start. But I want to focus on education in my input, and how education, particularly in the Eastern Cape, is the prerequisite for Black poor rural youth in relation to creating spaces for opportunities, spaces for their social upward mobility, and utilizing other youth development interventions. Because colleagues also, I think the first speaker also mentioned about the complication of rural youth struggling to access computers and all of these things. And the question that one can ask, who are the Black youth in South Africa that struggle with computers in this fourth industrial revolution? And the question is the rural poor youth and rural townships, you know. And it goes back to how our dysfunctional basic education doesn't speak to youth development intervention. So if you don't have a basic quality functioning education, one can speak about youth development intervention. So for me, I think there is a relationship between basic functioning education and the Nvta sector and the post-school education training where most Black poor youth are located. So for me, I want to draw this relationship between education and creating spaces and opportunity for rural youth. And for me, the functional quality of education is central and the starting point for any opportunities for rural poor youth in South Africa. And however, the work that has been done by most activist organizations and NGOs, particularly in the Eastern Cape, clearly shows us that there is no adequate investment and political effort to render quality education, both in public basic education and in the Nvta sector and post-school education and training where most Black youth are. And if it only exists in white papers and the implementation of that, then it doesn't exist. So our understanding of opportunities for rural youth must not be disentangled or understood in abstraction from our socio-economic context, what Luanda was speaking about, and in our context of education. In Eastern Cape, in the rural context, NGOs such as Equal Education, I think in 2016 and 2017, released a report of 60 schools which didn't meet the minimum norms and standard of infrastructure, 60 schools. And I think in the past 4 years, it's only 5 schools that have been built, basic infrastructure. So I'm sure you still have 50 schools only in the Eastern Cape who don't meet the minimum norms, which are binding legal policies. Now, how do we speak about creating spaces of opportunities for rural youth when you have an entire 60 schools that don't have or don't meet the minimum requirement for school infrastructure? So here you are dealing with the crisis of dysfunctional education, and we haven't spoke about the quality of teaching and learning. You're speaking about infrastructure. So how do we then speak about creating spaces or any other youth development intervention? And the notion of integrating the youth into the economy or youth development interventions cannot be realized if there's no sufficient investment and political effort to fix our schools. And so if we can't force government to comply to some of these legal binding policies in relation to fixing our schools, firstly in terms of infrastructure, but also providing quality teaching and learning, then the development that we speak about will only benefit the selected few. As we know in South Africa, that's the case. Any youth development intervention it doesn't speak about mass rural youth poor that are being given the skills of plumbing or whatever, but it speaks about the selected few that are unable to escape the structural trappings of our education system. So for me, I think we need to deal with first things first, which is the education, the Nvta sector, and the post-school education and training where most Black or poor rural youth are located. And if we can't be able, as government or other stakeholders in relation to creating opportunities, we can speak about an issue of youth development. And if we do, it's only a selected few that is going to benefit to some of these things. So we need to fix the basic education in the post-school, but also the perception of how our government still perceives a rural Black poor youth is still trapped in the colonial gaze of inferiority complex, because for a long time, rural poor people have been seen as backward and all of these problematic racist tendencies, which are anti-Black in context. So for me, I think we need to deal with the perception of rural people and how we as South Africans, even outside of the context of rural, but also those who come from the rural context, because now there are better Blacks in a particular class or segment of society. Now there are no longer those Black, poor, rural people. So the perception and the ontological question of Black being and how we view Black people, for me, I think is central in relation to service delivery for the youth. But also for me, I think the important contribution is how we need to firstly deal with our education system in the Eastern Cape, because if there's no fixing of our basic education, we can't speak about the youth development or any youth development interventions. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mascole, for offering us a different lens through education and the development of rural areas. They're speaking about rural areas viewed through the colonial lens. And you know, Mascole, you touched on something that's actually been a pressing issue in recent engagements amongst common people, speaking about the invisible lens, or rather the invisible veil of the TBVC states, and how that still frames our thinking. And I like the submissions that you made in terms of your contributions when you said rural areas really need to be reorganized. Because even if we look around the Eastern Cape and some of the things that we're seeing, take an example, education, we've really gotten to see that and at the end of the day, if we're really trying to foster a new culture within rural villages and really trying to develop them, there needs to be investment into these areas, not only from just a job creation perspective, but from a quality education output. So thank you very much for that. And it really has been fruitful submission engagements that you guys have been contributing. I don't want to hog your time, and I also don't want to create a conversation with myself. I'm seeing a lot of conversations coming through, Anela, Tembeka, Zico, and everyone else, Nandi on the call, Adam, Kaya, and the like. So I'd just like to open up this opportunity for those who are on the call and those who have burning issues, contributions, and also any clarities or questions that they may have, for us to now go into a Q&A. The host has been ready and they'll manage the chat as they come. But colleagues, I think we'd like to open this up for a Q&A session. I'd also like to just throw caution to the wind for the speakers, perhaps all four of them who are on this call. If you would like to just also go onto the chat and see what people have been saying, and if there's any question you'd like to address, I think that would assist us a lot in ensuring that there's a thread in terms of Q&As, and at least everyone has their question answered. And thank you for that. Please continue to pose your questions via the chat, and then we'll address them. If there is a question that I've missed, then perhaps you can assist me as the speakers to see this. There is a first question, Sia. Maybe you can just unmute your mic and address this one. I think it was directed to you initially by Ukaya. And he was asking, what is the NYDA doing to assist e-commerce entrepreneurs as the NYDA? Let me know if you want me to repeat the question.
Please do.
Okay, no, not a problem. The question is, what is the NYDA doing to assist e-commerce entrepreneurs as the agency?
Okay, I caught parts of the that I was suspecting would yes, indeed. So, as a just quickly, moved an agency from traditional businesses and now accommodate the current age within, assisting young people, all sorts of ideas that they may have. As it relates to e-commerce, we do extend assistance in that regard. It is a new ground for us, a new sector that we have looked into, and a lot of the time we are guided by the client themselves in getting, my apologies.
Okay.
I seemingly can't get back into my video. It says the host has stopped it. But yes, we do in short assist with businesses in e-commerce. So I just want to allay those fears. It is a new sector, a new sphere for the NYDA. We do look into the viability and making sure that that particular business is originally the idea of that particular young person. So there are a few rigors that go into actually getting a sense of the feasibility and viability of that particular business and whether or not it is originally from that particular young person. But the answer is we do assist young people in that space.
Okay. No, thanks for that. And thanks for your contributions. I think the reason why we had muted your mic is because, or rather turned off your video, is that the audio quality was a bit shaky. So do accept our apologies for that. I'll just take a group of questions. And I think a question that also came through here from Okaya as well is that now seeing that he does operate in this particular space, rather this industry, do you have packages that assist companies who want to start online businesses?
Yes, we do. Depending on where he is, Kai, we'll just perhaps take his details so I can actually forward him there. It's quite a straightforward one. Wherever he is, we can be able to assist him. We do have packages available for that type of business, depending on the size and what the requirements of the particular business owner are. We can have that conversation offline. It's not a problem at all. But the short answer is yes.
Okay, no, thank you. I'll take two questions. Maybe I'll take three. Some of them do have a preamble. So colleagues, please just also check out the chat box. Maybe you familiarize yourself with some of the questions that are posed there. But there is a question from Adam Frey and Ramon Kandu that was posed and says, if trickle down anything doesn't work, economics, for instance, what must be done? The magic word is coordination, but why is that a huge failure? And I think then it's a double question. Then he says, why is it so hard to access anything in an information age? I think I'll leave that to your guys' attention. Why do we have a lack of information in the information age? Perhaps let me throw that to Kwezi. I see, Kwezi, you've got your hand up. And I think at the time that you were speaking, thank you, the speaker was addressing you and you're speaking largely around access to information. I'm not too sure where he was going with the trickle down that does not work, but Kwezi, you can unmute your mic and just assist us. He says, in this particular coordination, why is it such a huge failure? Why is it so hard for us to access anything in an information age?
Thank you, Chair. Taking from our sector and actually what is happening across the country, I would assume that everything is being politicized. If we talk of opportunities that are available in our space, local government, everything has to go through ward councillors. Now, if you are talking of ward councillors, you are not talking of young people who are ward councillors. You are talking of elderly people that I refer to as gatekeepers who want to only allow certain people or people related to them to have access to information that is within the institutions they are based in, which is the municipalities in this case. But generally speaking, we are, as people, gatekeepers of information ourselves. There would be an opportunity that is available instead of sharing the information through socials where young people always are. We always say, go refer to the notice board. I mean, at this day and age, we're supposed to be using platforms that are more accessible to young people. So it's actually a combination of a number of things. not or excluding ourselves as people now, that we are gatekeepers of information ourselves. We are not being as transparent as we want the next person to be transparent about the information. So I would basically say it revolves around us, humankind, that if we can change that mindset, that let us allow an opportunity for everyone to compete. Let us not only look at giving favors to certain people. There's people who have all the merits to occupy certain positions, but they are not given such opportunities because we want this person, because I know this person. But what about the person that is unknown? So it lies with us as humans, as humans, that we need to change our mindset. We need to start opening up opportunities for everyone. Let's share the little information we have on socials, and we will get feedback. That's one thing I know. Thank you, Chair.
I think, Kwezi, I'll redirect this question to you, and then the second question, Lulu, if you could just take note of. So this question, back to you, Kwezi, is from Unandi. Information sessions are very empowering, but what happens when corruption and favoritism gets in the way of enrolling important programs, or rather rolling out important programs to the youth? I'm guessing those programs are youth-involved programs, maybe from a CETA perspective or just generally. What happens when corruption and favoritism gets in the way? And then, sorry, let me just get this one out to Lulu so that she comes in after you. A question by Oziko, and she thanks you for your contribution. She'd like to know whether it is possible, or rather whether there's a possibility or potential to create policies from the bottom up, where policy formulation and implementation is conducted in consultation and in conjunction with the people it is intended for, particularly people located in the rural areas. So Lulu, I'll just repeat that question. Uziko would like to know whether there is some possibility or potential to create policies from the bottom up, where policy formulation and implementation is conducted in consultation and in conjunction with the people it is intended for, particularly people located in the rural areas. I'll start with you, Kwezi, with regards to whether or not corruption and favoritism gets in the way of rolling out important programs to the youth.
All right, thank you, Chair. That's a tricky one because there's actually what is happening on the ground. We have quite a number of incidents wherein people bring their own people. People want to choose certain people over the other one. But in our case, as now CETAs generally, what happens is that there are strict entry requirements or guidelines for everyone to be part of these programs. Now, the municipality can try to trick their own systems, but when we are doing the verification and vetting of documentation, unfortunately, you cannot trick us because everything that we do is being audited. And I think now, generally speaking, if we can get into a culture of we now, people who are administrators in the institutions that we work in, we set out strict guidelines that if 1, 2, and 3 is a requirement, whoever that is brought that does not meet requirements, we have a stand and we put those applications of such people on the site and say, listen, these are the requirements. Whether you are the counselor in our space or whether you are the manager that wants to put in a person. I mean, we need to also take a stand as well, because if we keep on saying if we keep on blaming the next person, it means we are not playing our role in trying to fight against corruption. I've had these such incidents where projects had to be stopped because certain people were not part of the projects, and we had to come now as an external stakeholder to explain that no, there are entry requirements, and these are not set out by ourselves or yourselves, but they are sitting there on the SAQA website, which is something that we cannot try to alter ourselves. So it's not a good thing that is happening, but I think also we need to take a stand. We need to find people amongst ourselves who will say, now the buck stops here. This will not be happening under my watch. We need to be open and transparent. I mean, public servants, they are guided by the Batupili principles, which talk about accountability, transparency. But unfortunately, people are not living up to those Batupili principles. They are just there on paper. So it comes back to us as people to ensure that we stand our ground. We also outline to the next person that, listen, if you keep on doing this, unfortunately, we are missing out on many opportunities, and we are also missing out on acquiring new expertise within our fields of work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kwezi. Lulu?
Thank you, Amandla. Thank you, Zico, for this question. And I think it's complex in its nature because there need to be a lot of moving objects all at once. And what do I mean about that? I think when people say we need a bottom-up approach, they think the bottom-up approach will never have to actually interact with the top-down, or the bottom-up approach will have such critical mass that it will actually overturn the structure of the top-down. And I don't think it ought to function like that. I think we need to reach a point where we are able to cultivate a relationship with state and rural communities where we are able to reach a compromise on policy and objectives that we need. And what do I mean by compromise? Compromise is not necessarily to say that particular positionalities are actually undermined or overlooked. It is to say, okay, what are we agreeing on? What ideology are we using to inform our actions? And I think that's very, very important to ask the question, what ideology? And I think the first speaker, what he spoke about was that you can't, there's no such thing as over-consultation. That is true, there is no such thing as over-consultation. At the same time, that over-consultation must be met with a particular understanding of the ideology and commitment behind that ideology that will inform our programs. Because now what we are finding is friction between what rural communities say they want, demand that they want, rightfully so, and how the state is saying it's willing to come to the negotiation table. And until those two ideas meet at a compromise to say, okay, this is what we are collectively agreeing to, I don't think we will see the desirable outcomes when we say that we want to transform our rural economies. And I also think there is a need for rural economies. I also come from a rural economy as well, to start engaging in the political discourse. Because I've realized that this particular government does not really, it's a hindsight government. It only engages once we reach a level of an epoch. And I do believe that we need to start contesting spaces as the youth unapologetically, where we position our ideology, where we position our demands in a language that this particular state will understand. And unfortunately, I think this is a state of protest, and that's the only language that it actually engages in. And protest actually is not the protest of us constantly going to the streets. Protest is also us understanding our rights. Protest is also us using the general understanding of going into the streets and having those demands. But protest is also how we choose to engage in the economy. There are various forms in which we need to understand the idea behind protest and how we lever those ideas within key strategic points to create the desirable critical mass to force the state into conversation that is transparent, conversation that is equitable, and conversation that speaks to genuine transformation. Not only what we have seen, come to see that we speak to this idea of the South Africa we want when we are faced with an actual crisis that has the potential to plunder us, I think, into civil strife. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Lulu. Thank you very much. Colleagues, again, I am wary of time. And I will just invite the speakers as perhaps I just include the last questions to throw in their closing remarks, if any. And I do like to note a few things stemming from all the contributions that have come as a result of the question, just to steer the conversation back to creating spaces of opportunity for rural youth. And as much as we may be identifying areas that are gaps, overlaps, and challenges in these rural communities and identifying how the state or any other kind of support services have failed, we have to, at the end of the day, be able to identify what the possibilities that exist. For instance, the resilience within our rural villages that have continued to exist throughout the ages. And one of the factors that will allow us to really code shift our communities and create opportunities is to erode this urban dependency and rather exploit rural productive activities by creating, or rather really working through effective support services. We do understand that at the end of the day, there are many limitations, such as limited access to vocational training, land and financial services, and other educational aspects that the panel has spoken about. But if we're able to exploit these support services and be able to, as Lulu said, be able to listen to the heart of rural communities and what the people there want, rather than creating a demand approach, we can tap into the opportunities that rural areas do possess. And I think in summation of that, I want to invite, Anela, maybe I saw your question was long, maybe you can unmute yourself, share that question with us, and then invite the colleagues to wrap up and have their closing remarks, if any. I see Usia has dropped a chat there. Maybe perhaps, yeah, that can be your closing remark as well.
Thanks, Amanda. Sorry, did I hear you properly? Okay, yes. Awesome. Thank you so much. I think firstly, I just want to thank the information we got here today. I'm like the admirer, you know. I admire the work that you guys do. I admire the information you've brought forward. And also, I'm so convicted. Zikone bombs that were just thrown. I'm like, is that how I perceive a certain group of individuals who really need as much support as possible? And now I think my only question to you guys is, I'm an entrepreneur, and I've recently ventured into community development. And I find that Sine Challenges means, obviously, you know, we walk into a very traumatized space where abantu have been told they'll be assisted and they haven't, there are no resources. I would like to know from you guys, venturing into rural development and economy as entrepreneurs, how can we venture into that space? I want to assist, you know, whether it's with facilitation, whatever information we can provide to the rural community. Where would I go? To say, hey, because as a community, we wouldn't even know what's the most central space to have these particular sessions. And we could transport issues, you walk from 20 minutes to an hour to go from one place and to the next. So if I were, as an entrepreneur, to tap into the economy, which key stakeholders can I go to to make sure that that process is easier and will be able to make the right impact in the right spaces?
Okay, no, sure. Thanks for that. That wasn't directed to anyone in particular, but allow me to just guide for the purpose of just letting the question float in the air. Mascolo, perhaps you could maybe give us your view on that question, and then I'll give it to Sia and Kwezi just to kind of close it off.
Yeah, thank you. I hope I understood the question clearly. Look, I think there are various NGOs or NPOs that one can contact in relation to working with them, and it's particularly one has to narrow them down in a specific region or particular municipality. And I think I'm not sure where the speaker is based, so that I can maybe check where they are based and relate them to a relevant organization in that particular area. And I think that's the approach in working with civil society, entrepreneur and NGO. And sometimes there's a disjuncture between the two. Local Black entrepreneurs don't work with NGOs in our society, but also in the rural context, you find NGOs working together. A Black entrepreneur or Black business, if you want, is working on the other side. So there's no common community building between the two. And I think one has to find a relevant NGO in their local context where one is located. But I would like to know where the colleague is based. Maybe we can able to advise further.
No, she did kind of mention that she's based in Gqeberha, so maybe you can just engage with her offline.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that. I missed that.
Colleagues, Sia, Kwezi? And perhaps you can tie it up to any closing remarks that you guys have.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Just before my battery runs out, to really thank the other speakers, and I think in line with, and I've mentioned this in the comment, in line with what Lou has mentioned, there's a dire need for us to mobilize this critical mass, especially as it relates to organized farmers. In those sectors, even the workers are found vulnerable. They are not organized, they're not protected. The same applies to actual farmers themselves. They don't form part of some of these large organizations like the Koporasi have, where they can come together, exchange value, even buy bulk, and really influence policy from the point of view of farmers. Remember, our farming sector was the only surviving sector when we had our hard lockdown. That says something. Our food basket is very critical to the development of this country, and it can be one of the most resilient sectors that we may have in any time. So a lot needs to be said about that, and also the assets that we and the natural endowment that we have as a province. I think Eastern Cape is gifted in that sense. We just need to really get down to the work of actually empowering the people to work the land. So again, the point I mentioned earlier on and I touched on, the capacity that lies in LEDs. At times, our ability to move the needle forward rises and falls with the capacity of those LEDs. If the work and capacity in that space is insufficient or inadequate, then it can result in quite dire consequences as it relates to some of our emerging farmers. And there's a lot to be said in that space, and the knock-on effects, the employment opportunities that lie there. I've also done some work in that space, and so I understand that it's a plug-and-play economy. However, it's highly regulated, and for us to be competitive and commercialized, we really need to be intentional about it. Bring on board the relevant stakeholders, your South African poultry, your South African marketing, your South African marketing and agricultural council. We need to bring these type of stakeholders on board, but we need our government also to be true and honest about the type of capacity we've got on the ground. Because when it comes to LEDs, our extension of this, at times we are found wanting, and if that's the case, it collapses at the point of delivery. So I think that for me is a point that I like to part on. So
sure, thanks. Yeah, and Kwezi?
I think on my closing remarks, Chair, would be that we need to have a more targeted approach in terms of one, information sharing and also community outreach programs. We need to as stakeholders or as funders, we need to be more visible to the people out there, because most people here are sitting with ideas, especially the rural communities, but now they cannot get assistance on how to make their ideas a dream. So I think if we start there, especially if we are as young people who are in the corporate space, having these sessions, we need to take them down on the ground. We need not to only have these sessions online, but we need to target certain communities. We need to be practical. We need to have projects that we ensure that they kickstart and we leave communities busy with something, because if we do have an idea of sharing this information virtually, it means we also have the capability of going out there. And if we are, as these stakeholders on this platform now, have an agreement and we work together, it might not be a huge project, but we start small, and each one of us contributes in a way that they can contribute. I mean, I know myself can work with any municipality within the province, all 39 of them. I know who to go to when I need to work with their communities. So I think this is a good platform, but I think we need to also do more. The reason why I always bring everything to us is because I've learned that if we keep on pointing the finger to the next person, it means we are not involving ourselves. So if we are the ones leading from the front, then whoever is listening to us will be able to follow. And if we give them the baton to go on with the project, it will be much easier for them to continue, and they will still consult and say, this is where you left us, now what happens next? Then we'll be able to say, go to this door, knock there, and ask for this person. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kwezi. Lulu, do you have any closing remarks on your end before we wrap it up?
Thank you, Amandla, and to my fellow panelists. I think for me, you know, it's, if we talk about development, and if we talk particularly about rural development, that means we all have a responsibility, because across this province, we all have family members who live there. Therefore, we have an innate responsibility to ensure that the standard of living, the sustainability, the reduction, not that popular sloganeering that we hear of the eradication of poverty. I don't think we can ever eradicate poverty under a capitalist system. Therefore, we must look at the reduction of poverty and how do we implement that? And that means your skills, your education is that of your community. You must be able to give back to your community. You must be able to use your skill, whether it's from a commerce, whether it's from a humanities, whether it's from a science perspective, but it must find expression within the rural context. And we must agitate for that. We must organize within our various communities, and we must be able to create that critical mass. It is our responsibility. It is a collective responsibility, and we must engage robustly with the state representative, state programs, to ensure that these programs are able to make impactful change where it's needed the most, and that is by our peers. We know that in the context of South Africa, our development as this generation really was a roll of a dice. I could have been in the position of many of my peers. So we must be very acutely aware of that, and we must have a sense of responsibility to the collective good. And I think that must be able to inform our politics across the political spectrum. And I would leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you, Lulu. I think the colleagues have discussed a lot, and a great deal of information has been shared, and we've really exhausted our time. It's now 5 o'clock. But I think at heart, if we examine everything that has been said today, each one of us has some kind of attachment to a rural area, and in particular, rural youth. And most importantly, for us who are in urban areas, whenever we go to these rural areas, the assumption is that there's some kind of wealth that we have amassed by virtue of our presence, the way we carry ourselves, sometimes the way we articulate ourselves, and even the manner in which we present ourselves. And that's a fallacy that has been created by a result of, the opportunities that seem to beckon in urban areas. But we need to constantly be aware of the things that are left in rural areas and the impression that we have, because our aspirations are to move towards urban areas, and they're inspired by people who are residing in urban areas. So conversely, if the youth in rural areas are gainfully employed in productive activities, and their potential is realized, then that can lead to inclusive development. I think that, rural areas are really ripe with opportunity, but the focus and the large scope of the work has been in urban areas. And so I think, colleagues, with everything that you've said, it's then safe to be able to say that in as much as these economies are plug and play, on as much as they operate under such a micro environment, it does really present itself with rich opportunities. And there are definitely opportunities to be able to grow and to empower members of our rural youth. So I've seen a chat that's been posted there by Utembela that asked to just share these contact details of the speakers. I think if you get in touch with the event organizers, and I will call upon one of the representatives to do our vote of thanks, maybe they can share it to their platforms, because I think at the end of the day, it'll be too long to keep on posting each and every speaker's contact details on the chat. Perhaps you guys can then contact the organizers. But I'd now like to close off the session, and a vote of thanks will be said to our speakers. But for my part, it's been a pleasure listening to you guys. And at the end of the day, I think even our audience really gained a lot from you. Thank you to the audience for your patience, for your time, and just participating as well. I'd now like to call upon Uspo Sandi to do our vote of thanks and to officially close the session. Setu.
Okay, so thank you, Amandla. Colleagues, students, staff, and friends of Konrad and Cass, and everyone who's joined us in this webinar today, Molweni, Kamalam, Dingosipo Setu Sandi. And really my job here today is to really just thank everyone on behalf of the Center for the Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy and Konrad-Adenauer-Stiftung. So this is the third dialogue of this nature happening this year. Please be on the lookout for the fourth one, which is happening in October under the theme South African Transition to Democracy, a Critical Review. So we felt that it is a timely and a relevant theme to explore, given the demographic transitions taking place in rural areas and the implications for young people. And what I took from this conversation is that special attention should be given to rural youth in all discussions about youth. With that said, I'd like to thank our facilitator, Mr. Amandla Didiza, for his seasoned facilitation skills. You held the conversation together really beautifully. Thank you so much. To all the panelists for your insights and your wealth of knowledge, which you brought to this conversation. I really think that it was a robust and a fruitful engagement. To everyone who's joined us here today, thank you so much. This engagement would not have been possible at all without you. The organizing team from Konrad and Cass, the technical team, Dijindiabulela, Nangamso, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much.